We have Kapil, the CEO and Director of CAPA India, and Rajesh, Magow, the co-founder and Group CEO of MakeMyTrip. This session is moderated by Ajay, Mehtani, Senior Vice President, Asset Management, HVS ANAROCK.
We have two industry stalwarts here, Rajesh from the travel world and Kapil from the airline world. A lot of experience behind them. So let's try and understand how India travels today. What are the nuances of domestic travel? How do we look at it from a future perspective as well? What are the changes you think will happen in the future? When it comes to, so Rajesh, to you, when it comes to the spends by traveling, how do you think India travels? What is the kind of, where do they spend their money? What is the kind of affordability? We keep talking about India as a very large middle class, but is it really true?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ajay. Affordability, if you really think at the highest level first, is obviously a function of disposable income in the pocket, right? And it will vary from segment to segment, always. But I'll tell you one of the interesting trends that we saw and we picked up, and it was quite interesting. During COVID, post wave 1 and wave 2, when business was coming back, we could see, and you spoke about this whole middle class, the huge middle class, but by the way, that is true. Depends how you want to sort of see it and the potential of that. I think it's pretty huge. But the interesting trend was that people were ready to upgrade and sort of experience luxury properties, but at the right price point. So there was definitely a desire to say, from let's say lower end of the middle class, and say, if there was a right price point, and maybe I'll stretch a little bit, but I do want to actually upgrade myself in terms of just experiencing the better property or the premium segment, right? So if you really see the insight there from a consumer standpoint, I think Indians want to really spend more, but at the same time they would also want, at the right price point. So the value for money, but I think there's a huge desire for Indian consumers to experience more, spend more across the board, depending upon, of course they will have to see it from a disposable income standpoint, in terms of just specifically looking at the discretionary spend. But I more and more you see, especially coming out of COVID, a lot of people want to experience a lot and spend across the board.
So when you look at, because we have a lot of hoteliers in this room, what really is the sweet spot when it comes to pricing? So where do you see your maximum volume range?
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting follow-up question. Again, I would say I think things are very different from the pre-pandemic steady state standpoint, and we've been at this hiring sidebars. A lot of it, the big talk of the town is that, the ARRs have been very, very high.
Exactly.
And will we be able to sustain it at the industry level, or will they just come down, or what will happen? And, my view there is that if I just look back in history, look at the pre-pandemic times, where there was complete steady state. There was no pent-up on any segment. What we witnessed initial days as the recovery was happening after lockdown and stuff, there was pent-up demand on luxury segment hugely, and now there's pent-up demand on business travel, because there's huge amount of backlog on business travel that is happening, including conferences, including this kind of a conference, industry conference, government conferences, corporate MICE events that are happening, and don't forget the weddings backlog, right? So a huge amount of those, I think, is sort of influencing the price points right now. Although I would wish that same kind of ARRs continue in the yield for the see, there will be time when, you know, all this pent-up backlog, etc. is behind us, and the steady state will happen. And when that happens, then suddenly you will start to focus, you know, back on, you know, as in the earlier panels, by the way, I just wanted to bring in another additional point to this. Everybody is talking about expansion right now, right? So when you have more supply in the market, you are going to then suddenly start to at some stage get worried about occupancy as well. And the moment you start to look at that, and then on the other side, if there is demand pressure because the backlog is over, I think it's going to get rationalized. Now the question really is then, for every segment of the hotel, what would be the sweet spot there? There, I don't think we should generalize it. We should definitely see it, you know, depending upon what, you know, sort of hotel segment that we're talking about. Now within that, what could be, and again, it varies from destination to destination as well. So I don't think, and you know, and all these partners are, you know, knowledge and seasoned enough for them to you know, actually price the product accordingly. But it'll always work like that. Point number one. So, you know, within that segment, you know, what is this price point, you will have to discover as we get to the steady state. And the other important thing is that more and more we realize, at least from our point of view, when we see so much of data and we see the patterns from the demand side and the volatility and the sensitivity of, you know, at what price point the demand moves up and down, the elasticity of demand, and we share it with the partners. I think the agility on the other side has to be very, very important as well. You know, how quickly, you know, you sort of change that dynamically, keeping seasonality and keeping various other things in mind. You pick up the data, you know, points or signals from the market and absorb that, and how on a real-time basis you are able to, you know, sort of act on it. Gone are the days, because today you have the technology, you should be able to collect all of this data beautifully and get those insights, plug them into your pricing system and dynamically change it. And if you don't do that, then I'm afraid then, you know, somebody who's doing it better might be the winner. Right? So I think that is a very important thing for us to realize, that rather than just having a conventional way of just pricing the product, you know, 4 times in a year, or, you know, because I know the historical trends that this is the season that I should price my product at that particular point, price point or the other, I think it has to be real quick and real fast and on the fly. And then manage your yield management on the fly. And, you know, and airlines, by the way, do it globally beautifully. I'm sure Kapil can throw more light on it. But they end up doing that. And systematically, with technology help, which is very, very scalable.
So on that point, Kapil, Rajesh mentioned about how the ARRs are going up and people talking about affordability and pricing. What is the current size of the airline market in India today? And are there any airlines low cost? You know, with the price that they charge, would you say that an Indian traveler really has a low cost option today?
Okay, so good evening everyone. When you look at, let's say, the size of the market, let's say the airline market, the top line for FY20, if I remember correctly, was about $12 to $13 million. That's the Indian airlines. And if you look at FY22, it was about, let's say, $8 to $9 million. So we're getting back. I think FY23 we should be back to pre-COVID, to these numbers. What we have seen prior to COVID, and this is something for everyone to understand, is that you know, the industry was possibly growing and growing exponentially in the last 15 years, from 2005 to 2020. And the domestic grew at about 15%, 15.4%. But the domestic in the last 15 years, or last 10 years, grew double what it was in the last 60 years. So growth was not an issue. Internationally, we grew about 10% CAGR for about 15 years. But the industry was not viable. And if the industry is not viable, you cannot sustain it. And we have these structural factors which limit the growth of the industry to a point where pre-COVID, most of the industry was at risk. Almost, if you look at the last 15 years, $17 billion have been invested. So whilst you had this growth, it created a great consumer surplus, but you had an unviable industry. Then COVID came. The government, in its wisdom, said that we need to introduce fare caps. In hindsight, I think it was a good decision. Because fare caps did two things. It just set the floor. It took the pricing out of the airline, which is more strategic to them, so they got that out. Every airline had the same price, D15, D30, D60, D90, everything was the same. It wanted to protect the airlines weaker from some hostile pricing. And it actually worked. Worked in two critical areas. One, the consumer started, for the first time, making a transition that I have to pay more. I cannot, airlines cannot do this loss leadership pricing forever. So it was a great experiment. I was a big critic of fare caps in my own way. But when you looked at the results of the fare caps, then the consumer started making a transition that listen, if I have to fly, this is the pricing. The industry also was in a transition. The industry realized that the consumer is willing to pay. Why were we selling at 3,500, 3,700 a year? Loss leadership pricing, the RASK and cash difference was a huge delta. So prior to COVID, you had growth, but it was profitless. $17 billion lost, return on capital almost zero, it was struggling for cash. But COVID actually changed the industry both for the consumer and the airlines. They said, listen, I can pay more. The customer said. The airline said, I can charge more. Which was my assessment, the biggest transition that's happened. Now, if this is to stay, and I think it will stay, but one doesn't really know how the industry structure will play out. With investments that are very serious now, let's say Tata's investing billions of dollars, and they're very clear they want to be in this business for money. Even though they have a patient capital, resilient capital, long-term view, but they are cash flow driven, profitability driven, and that's what's going to be forward. Indigo, two principal players, 70-80% of the market. If this transition is to stay, where the consumer knows that I have to pay more, and the airlines don't lose heart when they say D7 or D3 or D1, the occupancy is less, let me slash prices. I think we are just about to witness the transition. Now that transition is two elements, that you can't do what's happening off late. The Q3, the yields for 54, 5,500, it will tell you 40%, 50% more. It will settle, it will level the playing field. But I think the transition, as my assessment begun, that would mean that if the fuel cost is 60% of your revenue, it happens. Nobody is going to burn cash. There's no appetite to burn cash. So I think we're going to go through the transition. Now the challenge in the transition is one, that, and this is a global problem for industry. There were about 700 airlines before COVID, global. Now name how many telecom companies are there. You name how many automobile companies are there. Or people in the mobile telephony area. A few. But here you have 800, 700 odd airlines. 150 closed during COVID. 150 were back in business, new startups came. So this is a peculiar industry where for strange reasons airlines keep coming, they pump in capacity. Capacity is driving demand with the bottom line almost never there for most of the players. But I think India is now reaching an inflection point of the change. COVID was a good experiment for airlines to say, listen, even if it's domestic, I'll price myself properly. I'm not going to give the consumer the pricing where I have to burn cash. Consumer has made a transition. Now we have to see that what's going to happen in the next 2 years. We're going to see overwhelming capacity coming. Now within that overcapacity means supply is going to be significantly higher. You will need to, the fares will come down obviously. But the question is what level they hold is critical. Now when you look at overseas, it's something for most of people who are not maybe familiar with the industry. Let's say an airline in Europe called Ryanair. It's a mature market. The market doesn't grow like in India. It can't go 20%, 30%. They subsidize fares.
Right.
Yet they are profitable because the ancillaries are 20-25% of the business. Till Indian Airlines don't find a balance and get a ancillary revenue to a stable levels, they have to just make sure the pricing discipline is good. Otherwise, we won't going to get back to pre-COVID, which I think is not possible.
From a customer standpoint of view, do you think that the price that I pay for a low cost and a full service, there's hardly any difference?
I think
from when I'm buying,
there is
what's really the difference?
The back end of the plane is similar. In India, if you go to, let's say, a Ryanair flight, you go to Luton, you go to Stansted, or you may go to Luton and Stansted. You have to drive down from London City Airport, take a train, then take a bus to reach. The airports are a different experience. I don't know, some of you may have seen what happens in Luton and Stansted Airport. India, you operate in the same airport. You have the same quality of buses. You have the same staff checking in. So virtually, except the meal or more,
there is no difference.
So this is a myth that the back end of the economy, frankly.
So when they call it low cost, technically they're full service.
No, not exactly that. When I said, the back end is the same between a full service and low cost. It's got commoditized to that level that if you go to Vistara, they will tell you that if you don't want a meal, I'll give you a better price. So that hybridization in many ways, LCCs have gone to a more hybrid platform. They'll continue to become more hybrid. And full service will also to some extent find, level playing field with the LCCs. But there is a cost advantage for sure. I mean, look at Indigo, they have this 321s, Neos, 232 seats. Gives you 15% fuel cost advantage, almost 30%, 25% more seats per slot. It's game changing in terms of its seat mile economics. So the cost will be lower for sure. But I think the market is more or less like what Indigo is going to drive in the back end or LCC is going to drive. There's a little bit of business or premium still there, but that's very niche.
Right. So coming back to talk about again, let's come back to the trends on Indian traveler. When we look at business versus leisure, and your platform kind of is one of the leading platforms where you are dealing with SMEs, B2B space, you are in B2C space. What's the kind of difference that you see when it comes to choices being made or decisions being made while kind of looking at options?
Quite a bit of difference actually. If you look at two different set of consumers, so let's say there are customers who are planning for a holiday, planning for a leisure trip and all that. It's a fairly involved, engaged experience, and huge amount of shopping also happens, right? Because you want to not only look for the right place to stay, maybe one step before you want to actually see which destination do I want to go. Sometimes sometimes you don't really know. And platform like ours, we also have a section where you can just explore various destinations and see and try to make up your mind just from a trip planning standpoint. And then also the decision making is also very collaborative with family and so on. So fairly engaged and fairly involved process. But when it comes to business travel, because the need is very, ultimately it is driven from the need, right? Because if you're planning a holiday, you clearly are worried about what kind of experience that I want to get it for myself as well as for my family. But when you're traveling business, right, for business purpose, your needs are very limited. You want more convenience, you want the stay to be more functional, and therefore you will have business hotels versus leisure hotels, right? Depending upon which destination that you go to. And the selection that you look for also not huge, not necessarily you have to go through some 10,000 properties before you sort of make up your mind. And I'll tell you one experience that we and picking up this insight, the platform that we built for the corporate world, more for small and medium enterprises, purely online. Although we leveraged a huge amount of sort of UI, the front-end UI, that was already there on the process there was that it's very simple. People are already sort of familiar with that and all that, rather than just building another screen for business travelers to sort of use it, as compared to the conventional corporate solutions. And that was fantastic, worked very well, got a lot of traction, etc. But within that, we made a lot of variations in terms of how should we curate the product. And we came up with an idea of MMT assured sort of hotels, and just 5,000, 6,000 set of hotels, destination specific, look at for different segments and say these are the only the depth of the choice of the selection that you want to offer, because beyond that it's not really needed. And similarly, you pick up actually patterns. Let's say frequent Delhi Bombay traveler was looking for going to BKC, one of the business district, and staying in a Hilton, staying in a Taj or Trident or whatever place, which place that we used to, or Lemon Tree for that matter, and you would just have that friend with you, and then the same traveler comes back on your platform, just show it to him because that's exactly what he wants or she wants, and get done with it. And it's so simple because they just want to get the booking experience smooth, convenience, and quick, rather than just spending more time, search, also shop, because there's hardly any shopping behavior. When it comes
also
to
the lead times may be very different, right?
That is
what are the kind of lead times that you see?
Actually,
what are they changed after COVID? Is it kind of pretty much the same now?
No, I'll tell you a very interesting question, and you'll be surprised in India, even for leisure travel, the advance purchase or the planning or as compared to, let's say, Europe, when you have spent one holiday, you're already planning for the next one, right? It happens very last minute here. So, it's actually, and everybody was asking me that, how's the summer looking? And I'm saying summer bookings haven't really started yet, because it's the first week of March that they will begin to start, and they will pick up just 15 days in advance, right?
So that has changed after COVID.
Not really.
It's always been like that.
It's always been like that. It's not changing. It's been last minute all the time. And for business travel, it's always depending upon the need of the business, you will decide.
Correct.
But for leisure, it hasn't really changed.
That's right. Coming to another thing that we were researching is that हम लोग cities को promote करते थे पहले, business cities को भी promote करते थे, right? There is so much that business cities have to offer, right? Bombay, Ahmedabad, other than food, you have fantastic sightseeing places, right? We used to do, मुझे याद है कपिल के टाइम पे जब हम सहारा, he used to be in Sahara, we used to do these Goa all-inclusive packages, which were unheard of at that time in India, right? And they were so successful. Is it something that we really want to look at when he talks about so much of supply coming in? Like there are so many aircrafts being ordered, so much seat capacity coming in. Obviously, you'll have to create demand, right? And business cities typically have demand for 5 days a week. So, is that true that can help us to boost? Is it something that will change? Is already there? What are your thoughts on that? Can we really promote our business cities as leisure destinations?
And most definitely. I think it's a great opportunity. If you ask me, I'll tell you two things that, because of the two reasons. One of the interesting sort of, again, insight happened and a lot of things happened during COVID as well. Some of these will stay, some of these may not stay. But a lot of people, when they were not necessarily going anywhere and, because there were not that many options there to travel because of restrictions, etc. People had started to spend time in city hotels, nearby hotels in city hotels. A lot of them. By the way, there were many people in Bangalore who would check in during weekend or including even during the week because it was a work from home and you had all that flexibility in city hotel. And that was more that kind of a use case, right? But that is more. But if you look at the tourist side of it, I would link this to the next. Where is the next growth going to come from, right? So we already have a lot of the urban cities which are driving the growth or has been driving the growth, as Kapil was mentioning, right? The huge amount of civil aviation growth in the past 10 years And there is a segment called Udan segment within that, which has been driving the next level of growth coming in from the smaller cities. So if you go to the Bharat cities, quote unquote, and that is what is going to drive the next level of growth. And for them, the first leisure destination is actually metro. Right? Because they want to come to the big cities because they haven't really experienced the big cities, right? And there is a lot that big city can offer. Now talk about Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, Chennai, Hyderabad. But
are we promoting them?
We may not be, at this point in time, because, given that there have been many other segments that has been the focus historically. But in terms of just looking at this as an opportunity for future, I think there is an opportunity. I don't think we're doing enough to promote. But I can tell you just from the sheer data that we see when the source cities we look at where the demand comes from.
Right.
And many times when we look at data, we will actually consider Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, to some extent Hyderabad, and Chennai, that it is a twin city. It is a leisure destination. There will be some leisure use cases that will be there, and there will be a lot of business travel that will be there. So I think just from an opportunity standpoint, there is an opportunity. Can industry start to think about this opportunity and curate products accordingly? The answer is yes.
And will there be demand, of course?
And there will be demand, and for demand you'll have to create awareness, you have to start promoting about that, right? So I think there is definitely potential. Are we doing enough to promote that? Perhaps not. But can we do it? The answer is yes.
So, yes, sure.
The question that we need to create demand is, my assessment, not logical. The amount of under-penetration in air travel in India. I said to you that in the last 10 years, the market has doubled compared to the last 60. But as for under-penetration in terms of seats per capita, we are 0.16 after this doubling of traffic. Data in India is misleading. When you look at Indigo putting a flight to Bareilly to Bombay, if you want to see the data and you deal with data, there's no numbers to show. And the first flight in the first week or 1 month, it's 90%. You look at Air Asia started a flight, and I'll tell you how under-penetrated the market is, and possibly people have not understood. They started a flight which they have discontinued. Bhubaneswar to Kuala Lumpur. If you ask a consultant and say, build a route economic profile for me, advise me whether I'll be profitable, what kind of a demand will I have? You will see the traffic data. There's no traffic data in Bhubaneswar to KL. They started a flight 90%. I'll give you erstwhile Air India, which was government with no commercial competence. They started a flight called Delhi-Vienna. And earlier, Austrian was flying on that route, taking 6th freedom traffic to the United States, and not taking 3rd, 4th freedom. When Air India started without any commercial, in the very few weeks, it was 90% occupancy, 3rd, 4th freedom. They opened the Eastern European route without any commercials. So I think the appetite for growth in India, and if you have to think the way to invest, obviously you have to invest, ensuring that obviously if I'm selling a hotel, I can sell ancillary products, and that part is okay. But demand is, I think we've not even touched it. International, you go to any flights, Dubai, I don't know, some of you would know, Emirates is 60,000 seats, 66,000 seats, no 95% load factor. Indian carriers 95% load factor. 40% yield higher during the last few years, last couple of years. The flights are full. If you put maybe more flights into Dubai, Singapore, or most of these markets, you will get the numbers. So you don't have to really, the question is, do you need to do anything to get the demand right? No. You need to primarily make sure, at least from the sector I represent, I have the right cost base to attract. That's the game. If you can get the right cost base and you have differentiated revenue structure, which is, let's say, passengers, ancillaries along with it, yield management works better. There's no problem with demand. It to me astonishes me that the kind of under-penetration that you see in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. And COVID seems to have changed that because there's a lot of people only traveling by air. So when you have an air traveler first time, you tend to stay. But I want to just add to what I said before, which is something that the entire, I don't know how much the hotel industry is aware of what's happening in airlines, because most of their customers come by air, domestic or international. industry prior to COVID had the highest appetite to use money. I haven't seen ever in the world that billions of dollars are spent and you don't take a decision to close if it is not working for you, unless you're forced to close. I think we have made the transition. With Tata's taking over Indigo and both of them at 80%, that transition has happened. To saying that it'll be cash flow driven, it'll be profitable, we are commanding 70-80%, and that transition is already begun. In spite of an overwhelming capacity that's coming, I believe the transition is there. The only challenge is that if industry loses because of the capacity, the ability to price it properly, then I think we won't ever come back to kind of an opportunity that we had. But my sense, we have made a transition, the transition is permanent. It may be good for Air India, maybe good for, let's say, Indigo. For rest of them, or let's say having the balance 25%, they'll have to find their own level playing field, but the transition is made.
Right.
But demand, frankly, is not an issue.
It's not an issue.
Even on international.
That's great to know. So we can order a few more planes, right?
You're already. You're gonna ask.
Sure, Rajesh.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective. I think when we think about India and think about demand and travel in India, we should not only be thinking about civil aviation. The India still travels a lot on railways and buses and cabs. You know, and you know, if you really want to picture it, peak season Shimla and Nainital and Manalis of this world and see the crowd of the cabs, right? See, I think the interesting point that Kapil was mentioning is that, and I mentioned about Udan, right? And, you know, Udan sectors had to be subsidized, right, for it to become viable. Now, see, that is all a function of, you know, as the country develops more and as it evolves more, right? I mean, it's just a question of taking a long-term view as the country is developing to start focusing on creating this infrastructure, the transport infrastructure, all of them, thinking that these are going to be mainstream sort of, you know, and aviation is going to be mainstream transport also, like it happens in the developed countries, like look at US, right? You know, so every little sector there is a domestic flight, right? So, but that's not the case right now in India, because see, right now India is, you know, civil aviation, and then there is railways, and then there is road transport, and you know, the expansion that is happening on the highways and expressways that we've all seen. I think when you bring it all together, because India is a large country, and we have a middle class, but we also have a, you know, pyramid structure, right? You know, you have a lower bottom of the middle class, and then you know, the belly of the middle class, and then the top end of the middle class. So as the country progresses, you will continue to keep seeing, you know, people moving up the ladder and then upgrading themselves from one mode of transport to the other mode of transport. So therefore, in many ways, I think the civil aviation was not viable in the last few years because you really have to take a long-term view and you needed huge amount of capital because the purchasing power, the buying power, which was a function of the disposable income in your pocket, you know, on a per capita basis, is not high. It's changing now, but it's not high.
Just to get, sorry for interrupting you.
No.
The way our airline distribution is, or the way our distribution is, that is not linked to airline profitability. I don't know whether you know that there is a pricing range. Even if you book 3 weeks in advance, it's not 2500, it will be 24 to 28. But normally airlines will price at the lower end of their range. You go to any distribution medium, and including MMT, and I think they're changing their to bring more value. It's on price. You sell go to Punjab today and say I want to go to Canada. They may have a deal with the travel agent. They will tell you to go via 2 stops because you're going to get cheaper fare while he's willing to pay. I refuse to believe that the customer in India is not willing to pay. Now, honestly, it's not. If you let's say the fare is 4,000 and charge him 7. Few hundred rupees or a delta of about 400-500 rupees. The customer has the ability to pay. He understands that it's a convenience rather than other mode of transport. But your distribution is my assessment flaw. And that distribution, till you don't restructure and rebuild distribution, companies like them have a critical role to play. Airlines will continue to bleed even if the consumer wants to. So when you say transition of an airline, to a profit-making airline, viable and sustainable airline. Without distribution remodeling, it can't happen. You go on MMT or anything, everybody sees price. There's no value addition. Airlines don't sell on their website, they don't know their customer. The travel agent, except MMT, may know more Indigo's customer than Indigo knows. So airline customer is willing to pay slightly more, allow you to be profitable, but I think the distribution is never going to allow them to get remote. And that's a fact of life, the industry has to deal with it. I'm hoping this consolidation of two airlines bringing 80% market share will allow them to move deeper into the airline business model and say, apart from keeping my cost, I have to set my distribution right, I must know my customer, then NDCs and ancillaries can be applied. Right now they don't know the customer. He knows Indigo's customer more than Indigo knows, largely because they are on his platform. So I think the same may be good for hotels, that the customer is willing to pay a little more, but I think the distribution will not allow him to pay more because they sell it on price. And I don't know why that transition can't happen for them very early. B2B model, travel distribution can't make the transition quickly. But the airlines will have to look at distribution and make sure that I structurally link it to the profitability. Right.
Coming to a completely different point, and it was discussed in our previous panel, sustainability, right? So important हमारे बच्चों के लिए, हमारे आगे की generations के लिए. What is it? Are really Indian customers choosing? It's almost like a marketing proposition, right? Are they choosing because a hotel is more sustainable? And the same goes for the airline. Will it kind of move to the airline model and airlines will talk about sustainability? I know they talk about it from a fuel efficiency point of view, but from serving water to plastic to a whole lot of other things. And this is such an important aspect. How do you see our consumers going to choose or prefer people who are more sustainable than the others?
This is obviously a very, very important topic, but if I have to be brutally honest, in India, is that the case, the question that you asked, that are customers choosing or is the ecosystem is also aggressively pushing for it as one of the top priorities? The answer is no. I think in pockets you will see humble beginnings. That has happened in the ecosystem. Everybody is trying to do it. You will see the certain segment of customers getting a little bit more aware of it, and therefore, beginning to sort of use this as the selection criteria, if you will. But there's a huge amount of work that we all need to do to make it, like a mainstream item. I don't think we're doing enough, including us, right? I don't think we're doing enough in the ecosystem right now to starting for creating more and more awareness, and also following through with the right kind of products, making it pushing it for consumers to sort of look at, as one of the selection criteria, if you will. Long way to go. But do we really need to do this? And I'm sure Kapil will be able to share more insights. But I think, like I said, that through our, let's say, MakeMyTrip Foundation, we might be doing something. I know some of our partners are doing, have taken a few steps about it. And they really all want to do it. That's the only good news. But I think there's a lot more that we need to do.
Audiences, consumers need to know. And airlines will bring in new aircraft, new engines, hotel will bring all the green. One, as he rightly said, far off. But the industry and the pressure from the West is not far off. It's real there. So I would expect that if you're traveling tomorrow to UK or Europe, particularly, is hypersensitive about the environment than the rest of the world, you have to pay for your carbon footprint. So if your ticket cost is 60, you'll have to pay for your carbon footprint. There's no other way. Obviously, you will have SAF, and it's a long way off. Engine technology will get better. You will do X, Y, Z, airspace. You'll have continuous design and all that. But no, it's far off. Obviously, there is tremendous amount of work that's happening on electric aircraft and many other things.
Right.
But travel to Europe, you will have to pay for your, let's say, carbon footprint. And if Europe, let's say, introduces that, if not now, maybe a few years down the line, India will have to reciprocate. So before the industry gets carbon neutral, that's 2050, consumers will have to pay for their footprint. If it happens in the West first, logically at some point of time it will happen in the domestic part. But internationally looks certain that if you have a carbon footprint, you calculate carbon footprint, you pay for it. And the indexation is happening in the
You know, being in travel industry, you obviously have to lead by example by traveling, right? But a lot of it is also business travel that happens. But if I have to travel with family, my favorite destinations are actually beach destinations. I love to do that, and you know, and the recent found new sort of area of interest is also wildlife sanctuaries.
Fantastic. So we've got you at a great place.
Absolutely.
Kapil, quickly.
I think travel is for consulting. It's just like you have to do it for a living. One doesn't enjoy it after a certain point of time. It gets too much. But personally, yes, we have a good time to travel with your family, to spend time with you. I agree with you. If given a beach,